Welcome to Radio Antioch. This video is an outreach of Antioch Tabernacle Ministries.
You know, I didn't really understand this part about the statement to the community of the poor. You know, this will be a sign unto you. And I actually learned to understand it because of a conversation I had with a friend of mine. I have a friend at work. He's African American. And, you know, we had an election recently, and it was a very historic election because an African American was elected president. And his face turned up on the news as one of the people down celebrating the election of Barack Obama in the park in Chicago. And I asked him about it. I said, I'm surprised to see you down there. This man is a very committed Christian, and I know he's anti-abortion, and I'm one of these people. I'm very anti-abortion, so I have a hard time supporting a candidate who is pro-abortion. And he says, well, I couldn't vote for the man over the whole abortion thing. You know, he's kind of like me in that way. He says, but I wouldn't have missed that for the world because I went down with my people to celebrate this day because it's a historic day. Anybody remember the pictures of one prominent African-American leader in tears? If you saw the news coverage, you know, there was one man just in tears. And, I'm not going to name him by name, but he's a famous African-American politician and civil rights leader and just in tears. You see, the interesting point is no one could say that a black man can't be elected president now. No one can say that there's no hope, that there's a glass ceiling. Sure, there's still racism and prejudice and all of this in our country. You know, I don't agree with the man politically, but neither does my friend. But he said, I would not have missed that for the world because our people needed to see that. They needed to go down there and be there, and it was historic, and I would not miss that. I'm African American. I was there with my community rejoicing that in America someone could get elected, because we've had a hard time the last few hundred years. And I thought, oh, now I understand this statement. The fact that God would say, here's a sign to you, I'm going to let the Messiah be born in a horse, and laid in a horse trough. Because the people who are downtrodden are the ones that need to know that it's okay and that provision's been made, because society is cruel. Okay? I think that people need to know that Jesus will welcome them. They need to know that he's the Lord of all and the Lord for all. See what I'm saying? And so I learned something from my friend that night. He said, I had to be there to be part of this. Even if I didn't vote for the man, it was time to rejoice with my community because it was a healing thing for my community. And I asked him, I said, do you think this will cause some of the traditional racism problems to begin to fade? And he says, it will help a lot because they can't say that there's no way for us to get ahead. You see what I'm saying? It was a healing thing for their community. And that's why I think the Lord sent the King of Kings to be born, to poor people. And if you don't think they were poor, let me give you, those of you who like to really dig in the Scripture, let me point out something for you. People always like it when I come up with little nuggets to go chew on. Okay, how wealthy were Mary and Joseph? I will tell you. They didn't have money, but they were not destitute. And I'll prove it to you. Because they were observant Jews following the law. So it says in verse 22 that they presented Jesus in the temple after her time of cleansing after the childbirth. And they brought as a sacrifice a pair of turtle doves. Now, if you go and read the Jewish law, in Leviticus 12, a new family was to bring a lamb for a burnt offering and a turtle dove for a sin offering. But you also read that if they can't afford a lamb, it was acceptable to bring a second dove. Now, if you go to Leviticus 5, for the sin offering part of that, it says if you're destitute, you can bring a handful of flour. Okay? So, the fact that they brought a offering of 2 doves, okay, they were not wealthy, they could not afford a lamb, they didn't have money. They were not destitute. Okay, they could have just brought a handful of flour, okay, for the sin offering. They didn't. They actually had enough money, And if you think about it, the man was a carpenter. They were never going to be wealthy, but he probably had plenty of work. Okay? So it's a working class family. But they weren't wealthy, but they weren't dead broke either. Okay? And that's kind of the idea that you get, is a everyman, common man. And that's really who, if you were going to send someone to reach man and just have the message of it's available to all, why not be a carpenter's son? So the King of Kings is born into a righteous but lower income working class family. By man's standards, the great teacher should have been born to someone in a rabbi's house and should have been educated at all the best places, but instead he was known as the carpenter's son. In fact, that was a problem. When they said, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" They had a problem with that. Oh well. Actually, the people didn't have a problem with it. The people loved him. But the religious, stuck-up, hung-up people who were in power had a problem that the carpenter's son had words from God. Okay? So it was the shepherds who were the first to go. It says in verse 15, "Let us go straight to Bethlehem, see this thing that has happened." And they came in haste and found it, and they saw the sign. And when they heard this, they made known what had been said. And all who heard it wondered at the things that were told them by the shepherds. You see, this message impacted them. It's like, hey, the good news is for us. The Lord loves us. He's restoring us. They're the ones that went out and preached the gospel. They got excited. Okay? Guess what? That's exactly what the Lord wanted. You see, because politicians and kings and religious leaders like to manipulate people for their own gain. Okay? But Jesus is coming to restore mankind. He was the exact opposite of the way the world does things. So the poor shepherds were the first to have Jesus revealed. And it was the poor shepherds who were the first to spread the gospel. Let's talk about Christmas gifts. How many of you have ever received a Christmas gift that is just stunned you, that someone would spend $100 on you or spend something and you're like, whoa, I don't deserve that? Anybody ever received a gift like that? Okay. I think that the idea of giving a gift for Christmas, before it got all out of hand with extreme materialism and greed and people charging themselves into debt and all that stuff, was a kind of symbolic. It's like, I don't deserve this, and yet someone gave me a gift that was a huge blessing. It was something that took my breath away, you know? It's like, whoa, someone did that for me. Anybody ever receive a gift that it so moved you that you were like in tears because you were stunned that somebody cared for you like that? You know, just something that sometimes you get caught by a random act of kindness. Somebody does something for you and you realize, I don't deserve that. Well, that's kind of the picture that these shepherds got, you see. They got, you know, we're just out here with the sheep. We have the lowest job on the totem pole, and all of a sudden, you know, angelic visitation. I know plenty of highbrow Christians educated at the best seminaries in the world that would love to have that type of visitation in their life, and yet it came to these common men. Okay? That's the unmerited favor of Christ. We have this favor that we don't deserve. And when you get a Christmas present like that, that's kind of what the whole idea is. Jesus came into the world to restore favor. See, the missing message that people forget, it says, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. The message of the gospel of Christmas is God is pleased with you, and if you will accept and believe in the one he sent, you can come back into relationship with him. All you have to do is believe.
Thank you for joining us today on Radio Antioch. You can visit us on the web at www.antiochtabernacle.org. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you. If Radio Antioch has been an encouragement to you, you can help support us by donating online on our website or by mailing to P.O. Box 741, Antioch, Illinois 60002. Donations are tax deductible in the United States. Thanks again, and may the Lord richly bless you.